Welcome and thank you for joining me today. This is Paula VanGuilder, and I'm an advocate for mental health and addiction on Talk with Paula. Feel free also to look at past videos. About a year ago, I shared tidbits for people that did yoga, meditation, and how to get through the winter blues, because we're on it, and I don't know about you, but today I'm freezing. So always, always remember, you're not alone. People care. I care. My email will be below. Cell phone, feel free to reach out. I get it 100%. But before anything else, I am so excited to welcome my guest today. This is Taysa Lynch. Hi. Taysa I connected with her. Actually, it was kind of cool. I went to take a class with you or something. I know we did a Zoom thing, but there was other people. It was a parenting group class to help people that have children that are addicts in recovery. Just a really good insight. And the thing is, which I'm very sorry nobody else came that time, but I had her one-on-one to me. And it was awesome because the insight you gave me that night was amazing. I cried. I felt, if you want to say a reality check, I guess, you gave me, how do I want to say that? As a mother, I'm on this, but you showed me what an addict goes through. And, see, I can feel it. I'll probably start crying. So what you did for me by being so open and honest, and to see hear your story from where you were to where you are now, it was like, wow, because your whole life story, it was, I want to say, I don't want to call it gut-wrenching, but it definitely opened my eyes, but I felt it. And so thank you. I am so proud that we connected. And please introduce yourself, talk about yourself, talk what you do, because I got to tell you, when you told me your story, like I said, it was definitely a reality check, because we can hear stuff. We can see stuff. There's a lot of blinders with a lot of people. But to actually know what somebody's going through that is the addict, what it does to the family, let it rip, because you definitely opened my eyes. And that's why I'm super psyched when you agreed to come on and talk, but to share your story, because it's beautiful. So I'm proud of you. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, wow. I'll probably cry too.
That's okay.
No, thank you for inviting me. I didn't use my voice for a very long time, and it wasn't comfortable when I started to do so, and it's very validating for me to hear that it helps other people, right? I've been very mindful lately, more so. When I first got sober, I wanted to scream from the rooftops, right? And I wanted to share with the world my story. However, the story's hurtful to some people, right? Yeah. And the story hurt a lot of people. And the way I put my story out there hurt a lot of people. And that was never, ever my intention. And I think that's part of the whole disease, right? We don't think we're ever hurting anybody else. We think that we're just hurting ourselves. So thank you for that. As Paula said, my name is Taysa Lynch. I have been sober since 2015. I like to think that I am good at what I do because I have been on multiple angles of it, right? I have been the person who was addicted. I have loved a person or two or three or four that have been addicted. And I have been the mother of an addicted child, right? And so to feel all the feelings, but have the understanding and the knowledge of what somebody goes through, and meet people with grace and dignity and empathy and compassion, right? No matter what side of that you fall on is super important. Alcoholism and addiction is generational in my family. Runs thick on my dad's side. My father is an alcoholic, which means I was raised with as a daughter of an alcoholic, right? My brother and I were super close. I had some pretty serious trauma when I was 12. And I can identify the root right now because I've done the work. Like, it wasn't glaring to me, like, as my life progressed, the dynamic or the situations that would contribute to my addiction later in life, right? But doing the work, I can pinpoint the whys and the pieces that are important. So that trauma when I was 12 is such a crucial age anyway, right? But when I went to somebody to speak about that trauma, I was told not to tell anybody. And I know now that that's generational, right? My parents, they were the generation of what happens at home stays at home, and what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. And we sweep that under the rug and we don't deal with it because nobody knows how to deal with it, right? And we just don't talk about it. And that's what I did. I withdrew at school. I didn't have many friends. I was a shell of the person I was. My mom recently gave me some pictures throughout my childhood, and you can pinpoint when the pain started. And it's nothing I've ever seen before until recently. Pretty normal teenage years as the daughter in a household like that, right? My brother and I relied deeply on each other and formed an amazing bond. It was the two of us against the world. My mom is an amazing woman. She was distracted with what dad was doing or wasn't doing, when he was there, when he wasn't there. And I can't imagine how that must have been for her, right? But she did the best she could with what she had and what she knew. And again, there was a long time to find appreciation for that piece. I met and fell in love with my very first boyfriend. Trauma bond I know now, but I was committed to being the best mom that I could be. I wanted to be the best wife I could be. I wanted that picket fence fairy tale. I wanted that my entire life. I didn't realize that I was putting people into that role that didn't necessarily belong or fit or even want to be there. So my first marriage, we just went through the motions. We got married. We got the house. We had the kids, right? And what ended up happening is I grew up and he didn't. He didn't have solid role models or parents to show him how to be a parent. So he just didn't know how to be. Ultimately, we hung on as long as we could, 10 years or so, and then it fell to the wayside. I just was to the point where if I was going to be a single mom in a marriage, I was going to be a single mom, and he would have to be forced to take them and take some responsibility. And so we ended up divorcing. Another huge milestone for me is this divorce. I didn't realize that. I never dealt with my divorce. I never dealt with the separation of my family, with the separation of my friends. Like, I took my children and I left. I left behind our home. I left behind everything that we knew, right? And I just was okay with starting over. Because I was so committed to being a mom, I didn't know how to be without them every other weekend. And I know now that I would self-medicate the entire week in a way that they were gone. And that was only every other weekend. But from the second they walked out that door, instead of healing and feeling what I was feeling and figuring it out, right, I self-medicated. And I just happened to have a new best friend that was into heavier drugs than I knew about, who introduced me, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the feeling. I fell in love with not feeling. I fell in love with the energy. I fell in love with the fact that I was having so much fun while not being with my kids. But, you know, the second that they would come back on Sunday, I would get sober and I would be that mom again for the next 2 weeks. And it would continue like that for quite a while. It was every other weekend. Of course, it progresses. It's a good time. It's more available. This friend turned into a relationship-ish, as well as any two addicts in love can be, right? I was on 2 birth controls and I got pregnant with my son. And I remember that moment. I remember how painful it was. I didn't want to have different kids with different dads. I didn't want to have another broken home. I didn't want to have to give over my child every other weekend because ultimately I knew it wasn't going to work. Neither one of us were healthy and neither one of us were in a position. but I was going to figure it out, right? I went to therapy. I realized how toxic my situation was. I realized some of the things that I was doing, and I put some distance in there quite a few times. Was able to stop everything completely at the time. I was clear-headed, clear-minded, and he showed up at the delivery room, right? And so that flashback of the white picket fence comes to the forefront, and we're gonna make it work. And the whole time he's doing lines in the bathroom, right? And I'm delivering our child. And as soon as we came back, it was a bunch of the same, only I reverted back to using because I didn't know how to deal with the situation at hand. I didn't want to put any more distance between us because I didn't want to share custody of my son, right? Like I really held on, and that's one thing about people in recovery. They'll just, or active addiction even, they hold on to everything that's comfortable, whether that's healthy or not. At this time, my addiction had progressed quite rapidly. I was finding my own outside support, so I wasn't reliant on him to get me things anymore. I've created quite a following of friends, right? I had all these friends, I thought. And I really thought I was a great mom because, you know, when we would go on runs, I would bring my kids, but we would stop at Chuck E. Cheese or Crazy Kids or whatever. The kids were oblivious, and we would stop at McDonald's, and it was a great fun day out, right? And I really, honestly, was oblivious. I ended up leaving that relationship and set myself up to be in the position to start dealing drugs. I was a single mom of 3 kids. I really didn't have skills or tools to do that on my own, right? No resources. And bringing in oxys was quite a lucrative situation at first. Didn't take long, a couple weeks maybe, before the habit kicked up into full gear. Right? There was not much money coming in. I was scraping by to even re-up to satisfy the people that I was committed to. It just was, it was a hot mess. It was a hot mess, you know, and when that was going on, when people should have taken notice, when I was putting my kids in dangerous situations, right? That's not when anybody showed up. That's not when anybody showed up. I was able to do it pretty much under the radar. Like my family knew I was distant. My friends knew I was distant. I was hanging out with the wrong group, right? Like people knew, but not enough to step up and say, hey, maybe somebody should do something or help out here. By the grace of God, I screwed over my drug dealer. I just didn't have enough money. My habit was out of control, and I just didn't have the money for him, and I lied, and I cheated, and I stealed to do what I had to do, but he shut me off. And it was devastating for a while. I was really sick, but I didn't understand about withdrawal or why I was sick, right? And I just couldn't get out of my own way. I was forced to get another job, right? Wow, imagine that. Grow up and get a job and put your kids in daycare and do the right thing. And I started to do that. At my new place of employment, I found my third Prince Charming, right? But this Prince Charming, he was a highly functioning alcoholic.
This is a story that makes me cry. Just letting you know.
Highly functioning alcoholic. He had the job, he had the white picket fence, he didn't have the baggage, and he welcomed us with open arms. And one thing that I've discovered about myself is I use people not intentionally maybe, but to benefit myself and my children, my situations always. There was always something in it for me, and I feel horrible about that now. But it was something I took full advantage of. I moved my kids in there. We had the perfect little family with the dogs, and it was all my baggage, right? And I was completely happy and content. I didn't realize how heavy his alcoholism was because he had so much going on for him, and I hadn't really been around or experienced a functioning alcoholic. I didn't even know that was a thing. Either you were or you weren't, right? Either you had a problem and you couldn't deal with life, or you didn't have a problem with alcohol because you were getting up and showing up every day. So quickly I became susceptible to his habits, right? That's a shot in the morning before work, a flask on the way to work, getting off shift and waiting at the bus stop at the bar being a bus stop in itself should have been a problem, but I didn't, my kids were coming, you know, and they were taken care of and they were okay. And I wasn't in that relationship very long before it became physical. There was some domestic violence going on. It was something I hadn't really had much experience with, besides like situational things. But that really took a toll on my self-worth and my confidence. Before long, my children were witnessing episodes and attacks. My oldest daughter became a defender, the protector of her younger siblings.
Yeah, that's, God.
She took full responsibility for caring for them.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not seeing that piece, right? I just think like that's her role and that she's the mother figure and she's there for it, but she's also catering to me. Like, within a few months, I was a raging alcoholic, a non-functioning raging alcoholic. I had completely lost myself. I had cut off all my family. I had cut off all my friends. I wasn't able to work anymore. And it wasn't long when the kids came to me and said, I don't want to be here anymore. I think I'm going to go to Dad's. And I was so defensive and I was so angry and I was such a victim at the time. I had the mentality of, you know, if you think it's better at Dad's house and if you think he can do better, then maybe that's what you need to do, right? I had no idea what the impact of that one statement would be. But part of me wanted a break. Part of me didn't have time for that, right? Part of me was just too busy wrapped up in my own stuff. And I don't know. They did that, though. They followed through, and the girls, they went with their dad. And here we go again, right? I lost my purpose, and I lost my responsibilities, and anything that I had to wake up for, that was all gone, right? With no end in sight, no knowing how long that was going to be. The situation became worse by the day. I would pray to a God that I didn't believe in every single night, that I just wanted to die. I wanted to die. I didn't want to live another day the way I was, but I didn't know a way out, right? At this point, I'm completely dependent on alcohol. We're sharing a half a gallon a day. That's from 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. By the minute, we would have to calculate, right, to make sure we had enough. And no matter how sick we were, how bedridden we were, we made sure we had the energy for one of us to go walk to the liquor store a half an hour away to go make sure that we weren't sick. And that's what it was. It was just being not sick. I was completely bedridden within the month. I would contemplate going to the bathroom in the bed because I didn't have the energy to get up. The dishwasher was broken, the vacuum was broken, the washing machine was broken, the car was broke down. Like, it was impending doom, and I just couldn't stand myself anymore. And I just was suicidal without the nerve to complete the act, right? Like, I just wanted to die. I just wanted to die. And I didn't know why I was still here. I finally got to a point where I couldn't eat or drink anything other than vodka. And it had gone 7 days. I would try and eat a piece of a cracker, and I would throw up. I would try and drink water, and I would throw up. I would take the first shot off the bottle, and I would throw up. But then it was game on, right? Like, my body was in complete shutdown mode. And a friend of the family stopped by one night. And it was dark, and I was a hot mess, right? And she's knocking on the door and the house is trashed. It was disgusting. And she took me outside and she said, "Who are you? Because you're not a mom, you're not a daughter, you're not a sister, you're not a friend. Who are you?" At the time, child support was getting cut off. There was no money coming in. And I'm like, it's not going to be long. I'm not going to be able to drink anymore. Maybe it's time for a change, right? And so I call Phoenix House to explain the situation. They said, "We have a bed for you. We have a bed for you, but you need to walk right up to that hospital and you need to get clearance because there's something else going on that we need you to take care of before you come over. But you go get that taken care of." And I said, "Okay." So I reached out to my mom and she actually answered the phone and I said, "I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm going to go to rehab." And she said, "Okay." And she comes to pick me up at 10 a.m. And at 10 a.m., we walk into that emergency room. And not a person realized I had been drinking because at this time, it's around the clock. It's every 20 minutes. And I remember having to negotiate with myself saying, if you can just wait 30 minutes before you take a swig, you can have at it. But just challenging myself, right? And I could never get past that 20-minute mark. And so I'm walking in the hospital at 10 a.m. and they're doing all these tests. And I'm like, okay, I just need you to sign off on this paper so I can go to rehab. And they said, honey, you are 4 times over the legal limit. And your pancreas is shutting down.
Yeah, that's...
And the doctor said, honey, if you were to drink for 2 more days, you wouldn't be here.
Sorry.
And I sat back and I said, damn, that was a close call.
Yeah.
I never realized the severity of that statement. Again, I never understood the power that he was saying, that I was that close to death. Because part of me wanted to. Part of me was upset that I didn't make those 2 more days. And so I spent 11 days in ICU just to get my nourishment up, just to get my energy up, just to get healthy enough to be a functioning person to go to rehab. And I went to rehab and I did my 28 days and I was an outcast, right? Because I was the only one that was there for alcohol. Everybody else was there for harder stuff. Everybody else was there for heroin or cocaine or whatever it was. And I was like, dude, you just can't drink, right? And I was that outcast and I was older and there was just so many things that just didn't feel good. And I was sober for 30 days and I was feeling all these things and I had all this guilt and all this shame. And there were so many feelings that I didn't know how to deal with, and I didn't have the skills and the tools because I never learned them. So here I am, a grown-ass adult, not knowing how to deal with my shit. And I get out of treatment, and they had offered me a bed at Transitional Living, but I was dead set. It was around the holidays. I was gonna go home, and I was gonna spend Christmas with my kids. And as soon as I spend Christmas with my kids, then I'll go to Transitional Living. But I'm going home, and they tried for probably an hour to convince me, do not pass go, do not collect $200,
Right.
just go straight, take care of you, right? But now I'm 30 days clean, and I'm going to go be a mom, and I'm going to go be all these things, and the world wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for that. So I go home against everybody's recommendations. I go home, and there's that Prince Charming sitting there with a bottle of vodka, sitting on that table, and he was congratulating me. You made it through. Now you know you can do it. Now we can get to it. And I'll never forget Paula sitting there and staring at that bottle. I bet probably for hours saying, I'm not doing this. I'm not giving in.
And see, I remember you telling me this story
Yep.
right here. I'm like, ooh.
Not going to do it. But ultimately, of course, I did.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of a week, and I was right back to where I was, completely dependent again. Only this time, I knew. This time I knew that it didn't have to be this way. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew whatever it was right now wasn't comfortable anymore. I had a friend reach out on Facebook. She was a single mom of 4 young kids and said, I'll come get you, but we're going to do it the right way. And I was just so desperate and willing that I took her up on that offer. And so I went and I detoxed on her couch again, and I started to get on my feet. I filed for my taxes. I enrolled in school, like several weeks, like all this stuff starts coming for me, right? I get enough income tax that I'm going to be able to get a car. I'm going to be able to get an apartment. I'm going to be able to start over. And he keeps calling and he's like, I want my family back, right? And she said, you go right back there. Go ahead. But I'm not coming to get you. Like, you have a choice to make. He said, okay. And so I said, no, I'm going to stay. And I continued to stay, continue to get stuff in order, right? Finally get an apartment. I get the car. I'm maybe a month in. And I call him and I said, can I come get some of my stuff? And he said, absolutely. Absolutely. I said, okay. I said, when's a good time? He said, why don't you come over at 10? And I said, okay. He said, let me know when you get down the road. I'll make sure to unlock the door when you get here. I said, okay. So I call him. I'm on my way. And I show up, and the house is surrounded with ambulance and police. And I go rushing in and found out that he had stabbed himself in the heart. He was hurting so bad and suffering alone, and he didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
He flatlined on our bed, and they brought him back. And he flatlined in the hospital, and they brought him back. And I was there every single day because it didn't matter at that point. Somehow that was my fault. Somehow I had responsibility and I needed to take ownership. I needed to be there for him. How dare I, how dare I go do anything for myself? How dare I leave him? How dare I turn my back, right? Because that's what it felt like to him. And that's what I believed. And even though it wasn't a good situation, I understood where he was. And of course, it didn't take long, and I was going up there. I was drinking every day again because, right, what's the common denominator? I don't know how to deal with it. I just don't know how to deal with it. And so I didn't. I went up and I showed up and I brought him home and brought him to my new apartment because it was going to be different this time. Because I was in my own space and we were out of all the stress and we were going to start over. We were going to figure it out, but first I had to help him get healthy. He had open heart surgery. He was young, 31-year-old, right? Like, he had a great chance. Odds were all in his favor. So I bring him home. But with him comes some pretty hefty scripts. And, of course, we got to stop by the liquor store. So we're going to be laid up for a little bit. And that's exactly what we did. So for 3 days, it was just literally a party, healing session of sorts, I guess. I don't know, a reconnection.
Yeah.
The fourth day, he went into a rage-induced blackout. The fourth day, he smashed all of my electronics. He smashed my cell phone and my computer. He smashed my TV. And he locked me in my house for 24 hours and repeatedly beat the crap out of me. The very last attack, I was laying on the ground and I remember saying to myself, you can't fight back, because if you fight back, you're going to kill him and you're never going to see your kids. Right after that thought, I thought, I keep putting myself into situations with people who hurt me. And every single person that's hurt me has been under the influence of alcohol. There's no coincidence there. And I knew I needed to do something different because I couldn't fathom the thought that I would ever get to the point where I would black out and hurt somebody on the level that I've been hurt. I was able to get away. I never looked in the mirror. I was supposed to go to work that day. A coworker lived down the road. And I'm like, I have to go call in. I can't go to work. I haven't slept. She called 911 as soon as she laid her eyes on me. He had broken my nose. I had 2 black eyes. My ears started to cauliflower. Defensive wounds up and down my arms. They estimated 36 blows. I don't know how accurate. But then what? Then what is there to do, right? Now you're the shell of a person. You have no resources. You have no support. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know what to do. Here I am, completely dependent on alcohol again, and I don't know what to do. I went back to my apartment after he was arrested, and there was a list for 12-step meetings. It was about 9 a.m. when I found the list. The meeting was until 6, and I knew I wasn't going to stay sober for the whole day. But throughout the day, I convinced myself I was going to walk down to this meeting. And so I did. I walked down to the meeting, and I walk in, and it's a room full of people who are laughing and smiling, and they're old as shit, and they're crusty, and they're all these things, right, that I'm like, what am I doing here? And so I sat my ass down, and I just remember saying, I'm new here. And they were like, yeah, no kidding. No kidding, right? And they said, you sit down and you shut up and you listen to what you need to hear. And I was like, this is definitely not for me, right? And I'm like, could not wait. I sat through the meeting, and for the first time in a very long time, I had gone an hour without drinking. Now, I ran my butt back home, and I drank all night, but you know what? I came back tomorrow. Tomorrow, I heard somebody say that they had been beaten. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I could relate to somebody, and I could get out of my own self and understand that maybe just other people had gone through similar situations as I had.
Yeah.
Because until that moment, I thought I was the only person in the entire world that had been beaten, that had been raped, that had lost their children, that had been addicted to any kind of, like, I just was this horrible person, and I couldn't see beyond myself to realize, like, other people suffer too. And having that one person share such a personal piece of her life so openly and freely changed my entire life.
Yeah.
Because the next meeting I came back to, there was an old couple at the end of the table, and they shared about their domestic violence situation and how he almost killed her and their family, but they got through it. They got through it, and they got through it sober. And then I came back the next day, and somebody shared about how she had just gotten her kids back. Right? And then all of a sudden, I'm hearing things from my entire life that other people had also experienced.
Yeah.
And it was magical. It was magical. I didn't stay sober, but I was trying, and I had some different tools, right? I had a different resource, and I was connected to people that finally understood what I was going through. Because my entire life, I feel like I didn't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
There wasn't one place I belonged, no matter how comfortable I seemed to feel. It just wasn't comfortable. It gave me the power, like I talked about before, to share my story openly, maybe a little bit too openly, right? Like, I just wanted to shout from the rooftops all the things that I had been through and all the things that I had gone through, and that I was able to come out the other side. And if I could do it, of course, you could do it too. And I really have been a helper ever since I could ever remember. I just had to figure out what that looked like. 6 months sober, I took Recovery Coach Academy. It's a peer support model, changed my life. It empowered individuals who had suffered with hard things to use their experiences to help others openly and honestly. Like, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
That was unheard of. I was one of the first people in New Hampshire to be certified. It was a trial run. From there, I opened a small pilot Hope for New Hampshire Recovery office. We had an amazing group of maybe 12 of us who were struggling with some kind of addiction that were just like a little pack. We followed each other around. We met every day. We shared. We healed. We loved. We were just there for each other. And then that closed. Almost every single person from that group relapsed. I connected with Springfield Turning Point and they were starting to do recovery coaching in the emergency room in Vermont. Through my work with Hope for New Hampshire Recovery, I was involved in the pilot program at Dartmouth, so I was familiar with the process. In the meantime, in between, I had worked at Valley Regional in Claremont doing the same thing. So Springfield Turning Point hired me on for that program. I still continue to work there for that, but here I am a few years in, right? And I still don't have my kids back. So my son, he never ventured far. His dad and I continued to stay toxic for quite a while and co-parented the best we could through that. So I was never estranged from my son, but my daughters, there was complete parent alienation. Like, I wasn't allowed to talk to them. I wasn't allowed to see them on social media. I wasn't allowed to text with them, to see them. There was 1 hour supervised visits, which was supervised by my ex-husband. So it was very intimidating, not only for me, but for the children, right?
Yeah.
It was very little conversation. So I just threw myself into volunteering, into working, into all these things, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have stayed sober.
Yeah.
Right? My whole goal to get sober was to get my kids back, and that didn't happen immediately like I thought or hoped it would. And I see now, like, I had a lot to learn and a lot of growing and healing to do to be my best self, to be a good mom for them. It had to happen the way it did, even though I didn't agree or even like that at first, right? But it allowed me the time to really work on myself and not just the surface stuff, right? All that guilt and shame I talked about, that was just the surface level, immediate things that had happened, right? As I continued to get sober, as I continued to heal, more of the deeper stuff came to the forefront, right? And I tried distracting myself with men and sex and all these other addictions. The gym, I took up the gym in excess, eating healthy in excess, right? Everything's in excess. And it took several years of recovery to figure out, like, hey, you're just using different distractions. You're hurting yourself in different ways, right? And this still isn't who you are. And as I started to dig deeper, I really recognized, right, the healing needed to start in the youth piece.
Yeah.
Shortly after all that, the kids started to come back around on the weekends, right? And here I am, like, I'm sober, I'm healed, here I am, I'm here for it. I'm a few years in, I'm doing the work, I'm doing good for everybody else, I'm helping people, I'm working a ton, I'm getting some respect and some recognition for the things that I'm doing, right? I'm good. I failed to realize that their healing hasn't even started yet.
Yeah.
Right? Because this whole time I'm thinking, like, I'm not hurting anybody but myself. Why do you care that I'm drinking? Why do you care that I'm addicted? Why do you care? This doesn't affect you at all. I'm only hurting myself. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? I don't realize this till later on. So I'm finally starting to get my kids, and they're throwing out questions, and they're throwing out stabs, and they're throwing out remarks. Like, there's real pain there. There's real trauma there that I just wasn't even prepared to tackle. You know, and it would have been really easy to jump right back in that bottle or whatever the case may have been. But I suited up and I showed up for it. And it was uncomfortable and it was hard and it still continues to be, right? Like, I'm 8 years in and there's still days when one of the girls will say something and I'm like, excuse me, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
And I want to be offended. I am offended, right? I'm hurt and I'm embarrassed. And I'm like, oh, heck no, we're not going there. But we are going there. We are going there and we are going to revisit any topic, any discussion that we have to until it's not an issue anymore, right? And they deserve to be heard and validated, and their reality is their truth. And so at this time, I'm a couple years in, I'm already established at Turning Point. Our director, Michael Johnson, comes to me and says, I have a grant opportunity, I've gotten some funding, and we need to create something for youth. And those were the parameters. I'm giving you the lead on this. Do something for our community surrounding the youth. And I was like, oh, crap, I do great with guidance.
Yeah.
You tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. But just to have that freedom. And so I really started to think, what was most beneficial in my recovery, right? And that's the peer model. What did I need when I was younger? I needed somebody to talk to. I needed somebody to tell me that they had gone through it too. I needed somebody to tell me how to get through it. And I needed somebody to tell me
Validation.
how to deal with the crap.
Yeah.
And so I collaborated with Matt Wolf from Vermont After School. He is all things youth empowerment, youth voice. He is amazing. And we created a youth leadership program for Windsor County. And so the theory was I was training youth, such as my daughters, who at the time were super embarrassed, right? They were super embarrassed that I had to share a story. They were super embarrassed when we went places and people recognized me because, right, I'm plugged into all these places.
Right.
And I'm everybody's hero and I'm on a pedestal for so many people because I share openly and I share honestly, and people knew who I was, right? And so it was overwhelming for them. Like, literally, we would go out to breakfast and one of a patient or a client or a peer would come to me and be like, I have my baby, and want me to hold their baby, right? And I'm trying to have breakfast with my daughters who we hadn't been together for a long time. So they didn't understand it, right? Because generationally, this was a new concept. The Me Too movement really, really helped empower the peer-based model. It was like giving people the power to use their voice. And so it took me a long time to explain to the girls, like, if we can use our story to help other people, if our pain had a purpose and we are able to turn it around to a positive, then I think we need to do that. And so I really recruited them and their perspective in the whole creation of the youth leadership program. Like, what do you think would be beneficial for you? Like, for them, at this time, they're 18 and 16, right? What would have been helpful for you when mom was gone, right? Because they, too, thought they were the only ones that were estranged from their mom. They thought they were the only one that had a parent that was addicted to anything. They were the only kids that were suffering in silence, right? And that creates a lot of suffering in silence.
Yep.
And so we worked really hard on creating this program and having it be helpful to youth who are struggling with substances. But after we launched it, it didn't take long for us to figure out like this model worked across the board.
Yeah.
We were getting referrals to see youth who had lost their parents to addiction, whether it was overdose or incarceration, or if they were placed with grandparents, which is a new thing, right? Like so many grandparents raising their grandchildren. We found that it's helpful for youth that are trying to transition or trying to navigate their sexual identity, mental health struggles, bullying, racism, like all these things. We were being requested for so many things across the board. And it felt good.
Yeah.
It felt good that we were able to create something that was helpful. What ended up happening is the program went statewide. It went into New Hampshire, and now it's just a few of us, myself and the girls, who are now using their voice. They're now using their story without being embarrassed of our story, right? We've empowered these two girls who were once, but now these girls are influencing their peers, either by supporting them when they're suffering or supporting them to be peer leaders.
Right. Which is awesome.
How did that happen?
Yeah, that's awesome.
How did that happen? We've had a major cut in funding across the board. Recovery centers in general are receiving less funding. Through my works at Turning Points, I've realized the work that I'm doing with these other youth that haven't experimented yet is actually prevention. It's actually prevention. And so I started working with an organization called Prevention Works Vermont. We are essentially a coalition of coalitions. We support bringing organizations across the state together for networking, for resource sharing, for brainstorming, for collaboration, right? And when I started, it was coalitions primarily. It was primary prevention. And because I, again, was able to use my voice and say, hey, we need other people at this table. Because because they're on the other side of the continuum, we're having these same conversations over there. And so in the 2 years that I've been there, we have now welcomed over recovery centers, harm reduction organization, other
That's awesome.
staff. Like we're just bringing so many different dynamics to the table to have these conversations, right? And so that's a larger scale of how the collaborating works like that, and using your voice and advocating yourself. You know, when I worked for Prevention Works for the whole first year, I just sat back and I observed. I was overwhelmed. I was intimidated. Even at 6 years in, I didn't feel like I belonged at the table. I didn't feel like I had anything to offer, right? But the last 2 years, having the coworkers and the leadership team that I have empowered me to use that voice. And that my perspective is valid and welcomed and wanted, right? Yeah. And I've become somebody that people come to on many, many different levels. And I love now that I can tell my story and people say, I can't imagine you ever being that person.
Yeah.
I cannot ever picture you being that person, right? I've been a helper my entire life. I plug into people and organizations that I've seen that we need. Sleep in Heavenly Peace, you've had Bob on before. We opened a chapter in New Hampshire. It was unintentional that I was going to take the lead. I was kind of roped in by a colleague who ended up recruiting me to go be co-president. Shortly after we took the training, she was unable to fill her commitment and left her role. So that left me to open this chapter, right? But I created a sober army of people that wanted to give back and that wanted to make a difference. And I remember it's typical. Any person that comes on is like, we don't need this in our community. This isn't, you're not going to have any luck, right? And I'm a firm believer in build it and they will come.
Yeah.
I opened the chapter of Sleep in Heavenly Peace a year ago last week. We've had 4 bed builds. We've brought communities across the state together to work together to build these beds, to deliver these beds, different dynamics that naturally wouldn't click or are high-fiving and hugging on build days, right? And they're getting together and seeing how they can contribute to the community and how they can help. Like, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. You know, I keep saying I'm 8 years in. I've bought my own house. I've rebuilt my credit. I've rebuilt my life. I have a house on the lake. My children are with me all the time. Like young lady, adult women that need and want their mom all the time, right? Like that's our relationship. I like to say we repaired our relationship, but we've gone so far beyond where we ever were, right? In recovery, I've learned the skills and tools the hard way to deal with things that are hard, to deal with life as it comes. I've been able to share that with my kids, and I know that that sounds like a basic thing you check off your list when you're a parent, right? But there's so many things that I didn't know that I was supposed to know, right? And so my son, he's 12, he gets the best of all of us, right? I'm remarried. I have an amazing husband who is sober. He was struggling when I first met him. He wanted to do better. He was trying to do better. He just didn't know how to do better. He's going to be celebrating 4 years of recovery.
That's awesome.
Right? We're learning how to deal with our traumatic pasts together, whether it's childhood, young adult, medium adult, whatever it is, right? Like, we all have stuff that we bring to the table, and we're both willing every single day to wake up and be grateful for the life that we've built together. The ability to show our kids a different way, and to be productive members of the society, all while kicking butts at our jobs, right? Like, we've really established.
It's a good feeling.
Life, and part of that is never forgetting where you came from, right? I firmly believe that we outgrow roles that we're once in, right? When I was a new recovery coach, working with people that are just coming into detox or looking to get into detox, right? Like, I've done my fair share of that. However, I will always be available to those individuals who are seeking help that just don't know where to go.
You can speed dial her if you want, or just click a quick text because you're on my.
Literally. I've also created support groups for parents who have youth that are struggling with substances because we don't know what the hell to do, right? One thing I missed is while my kids were coming back, I didn't know they were coming back with their own substance use problems, right? They've lost their mom. They're at dad's house doing whatever they want to do, right? What they wanted to do was start experimenting with self-medication. One of the hardest moments of my life was after we were all brought back together, and it was myself and my kids for a while, healing and living together and getting to know each other again and reestablishing a relationship. But the girls were right in the middle of their journey with addiction, and it started out with they were just smoking weed, right? That's what they said. They were just smoking weed. And as a mom, I understand, right? As a mom in recovery, I understand we all have our own path. There was nothing that my mom could have said to interject to say, you need to cut it out, right? So I met them with a different approach. And I said, I know that you think you know what you're doing, but I've been in the game long enough to know that what you're doing is dangerous. And so they both admitted and told me where they were at. They were drinking occasionally. They were smoking all the time. Here I am overcompensating because I want to make up for lost time. I'm trying to be that mom. I'm giving them everything. I'm doing everything, right? But I'm trying to come at this at a different angle. And I happened to be working at a Suboxone clinic at the time and had access to UA, so urine analysis. So I said, I just want you to pee in this cup. And so they did after our conversation, and they both popped positive for fentanyl and opiate. And I said, this is you just smoking weed, right? Because that's not what it is anymore. It's not back in the day in the 60s, 70s, 80s when people are out back growing their own weed and it's a good time, right? Like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. And my youngest daughter is scared her straight. And my oldest daughter, well, she was just like, I'll get it from somebody else, right? Like, that rebellion. And she had her own journey to go on, and her journey got worse, and she followed in my footsteps in a lot of ways. She got herself into a really toxic relationship where she struggled with domestic violence. She left the house. She went to live with him. She was self-medicating, right? And I remember laying in bed and not being able to get out of bed because I was grieving the loss of a child that was still living.
Yeah.
But I knew if something didn't change that I would lose her. And I had to prepare myself to do that. And I didn't know what else to do because knocking on her doors didn't work and begging didn't work and pleading didn't work. That's where I really found that I did have a faith that I didn't really understand, right? Like everything happened for a reason in my journey. I had to experience things that I didn't understand to be able to be helpful to people now. And I feel wholeheartedly that that's my purpose, that every piece of my story led me to where I am and makes it so that I am a good helper. But I also knew she had her own journey and I didn't know what that looked like. Luckily, because I was open, because I was honest, because I didn't turn my back and I was available, she came home. She came home. I enrolled her in VLAX. She graduated with honors. Now she was not going to graduate. She got sober and she's thriving. Like there's some underlying mental health issues across the board in our whole family dynamic, right? But she can suit up and she can show up and she can face them even when it's hard. And there's still days she calls from work in the bathroom crying and a puddle on the floor, but we can talk through it, right? And she knows that she has somebody she can go to that understands what she's feeling.
Yeah. You, that's all I have to say. I'm like this. Because when I actually, as I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, no, it was we're in 2023 going into 20. I started chatting with you the fall of 2020. It was literally like COVID fall. COVID happened that February. It was like that 2020. And sorry.
Please don't apologize.
Because I've been crying with you and it's like, when I started this, and I actually will have a clip of the first time. I remember why I wanted to do this, come out and be honest, because you have to be honest. You have to, in order to help others, you got to go balls to the wall and just put it out there.
But it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage, and I commend
And I
you for
remember
doing
telling people, my history was growing up the perfect girl. You know, I was popular and had a beautiful house, and you just didn't talk about shit growing up. My addiction has always been food. That's been my thing. I've never had, it's not that I didn't experiment with things, but I did. But I grew up with a brother that was schizophrenic that people shunned. So I'm actually, I'm going to show the first part of when I started this. So I remember I had his picture, and I also talked about growing up in dysfunction and abuse and what it does to somebody. It forms you. So as I was explaining then, I don't care who you are, a good majority, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would almost say majority of addiction, people suffering, there's a history. They don't wake up one day and be like, shit, I'm going to throw a needle in my arm. No. There's a lot of deep-seated pain that a lot of people don't understand. And that's why when I chatted with you, I'll never forget that night. It was so weird because here we were going to do a group and it just was us. And I felt the same exact feeling when you started telling, and thank you, by the way, honey, because I'm so proud of you. But I knew your story people need to hear because it's raw, it's real, but there is hope. And to see everything you've gone through, being open about it, to talk about it, how much you're helping people. Excuse my sniffles, I have a cold, but plus I'm crying. But to see how far you've come and where you're at, it's like so much to celebrate. And it's like, I can't even tell you how proud I am. And I know I say that to you, but I am, because it's like, and the weird thing is, you want to hear this? I've never actually met her per se until today. We've been on the phone, we've done Zoom, we've texted. It's just to connect. She's well of my journey. You know, I know what she's doing. She supports me in my family members' recovery, which I'm so proud, but she kind of gives me insight of, no, that's normal, what's going on. I've had a lot of guests on here, and please don't take this wrong, anybody. But you're the one that I really needed to come on here and talk, because you're real. And it's not that nobody's real, but you just blah. And that's what you need. We all need more of us to come out and say what's gone on. I know so many don't want to talk about it, don't want to share stories, live this image that drives me nuts. It's like, you can paint a real pretty picture on Facebook, social media, real pretty. You can make yourself look like your life's grand. I don't give a rat's ass. I don't give a rat's ass, because it's like, we all have a history. And I have said that so many times on here. And I remember when I first started this, and after talking to you, it was kind of funny, because I had already, I'm trying to think, did I already had start writing my book? Because I know I shared it with you. I went balls to the wall after, because I was like, boom, every little thing that you were talking about. I mean, I dealt with my history actually when my son was born. I wanted to be the best mom. I needed to get rid of that pain. So I dug deep. And I don't know if it's why I have the relationship with him, because of him, he made me want to fight. He saved me. And sorry, he doesn't understand that. And he's gone through his own journey because of, dysfunction. I was married to a real asshole. I should have gotten out of it. I should have, could have, would have. But yeah, until finally one day I was like, I'm done. And I left my house with nothing. I left with a bag for each of my 2 kids, and that was it. And I worked really hard, but prior even to that, I had already gone through like the major counseling. I mean, I was in support groups counseling for what had happened, the trauma that I went through growing up. But I still battled depression and anxiety. And I was more of a, what's the word? Not that I pushed things aside. I just was a boom. Like, I just kept moving. I wanted to make sure my kids had a roof over their head, everything that they needed, because that was what I did until I finally had to go boom. And that is one of the major reasons why I started really pushing to be an advocate. I emphasize all the time, I'm not a clinician. I know struggle and pain that people go through. I know a lot of times when people are in a funk, they feel alone. But just like you said, the more you can get your stuff out there, you're going to start realizing you're not alone. There's a lot of us that have gone through a good majority. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Everybody's gone through something. It's about fighting through that guilt and shame, right? And it's not even ours to carry.
Yeah.
It's not my fault I was raped. It's not my fault I was molested. It's not my fault that I did these, right? Like, was in these situations. It is. I take the ownership of I should not have been in the situations. But there were some situations I was in because I was in them.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I look at and hear you, it's like, wow. And you talk for schools. I actually wanted to, that was my next thing with her. But it's like, there's a program that we're doing for leadership, Ryan Palmer, who's the sheriff. And I even brought you up then, because it's like there's so many things that I'm in that I'm like, oh, she'd be good for this, or oh, she'd be, and I know you got your stuff going all over the place, but I know, and I'm hoping when people see this video, you're spot on, and I know it's going to help others. And you know, you can keep adding stuff, whatever you want to still talk or whatever, but I just know everything that you've gone through, how honest you are, but to see the light at the edge of the edge, because actually I vented to you, I remember 2 years ago when stuff was going on. And you were like such an awesome insight. You're like, just hang on, mama. You got this. And
Sometimes it's all we
yeah.
need.
And then she said, when I was so excited, because I was like, oh my God, he's been sober. Actually 4 months. 4 months and 1 week. And you celebrate it. Like, good job, mama. You know, I'm proud of both of you. And it's like, it's not something, and I definitely don't usually, I mean, I did write that for my thankful thing. What am I thankful for? But it's like, you're like, awesome, because you do get it. You're not like somebody just down the road or whatever. You know the struggle, what it is to stay clean. You know the feelings, you know what you got to go through, but you're honest, you're real, and you don't sugarcoat. Jesus, she doesn't sugarcoat. You want to know the truth, just talk to her, because she'll tell you. She's going to be, not going to be like, oh, she's going to be like, this is the shit that's going on. This is what needs to happen.
And you need to suck it up and cut the shit.
Yeah, literally. I mean, like, okay. I mean, I don't remember what you said to me, and it really made me step back. Did I ever show you the letter I wrote to him? Remind me to send it to you.
I don't think so. I think it was more about, and I never tap into this because I never assume about faith, but it's more about understanding, like, he has a journey, right? And you have a role in that journey, but you can't guide his journey for him.
She said that to me.
And I think I just wrapped it right back around to you and your journey and how you had to figure it out on your own. And that, not like it alleviates anything, but it kind of shifts ownership to the person responsible to make a change, right? No matter how much we want somebody else to do better or different or whatever, we want the best for people, right? It takes so much energy. Because you can't be putting in more work than the person that needs to change. And that's what you were doing, and you were exhausting yourself. And
I was living in fear, and I remember I was talking to you, and I said, if I keep carrying, he's never going to learn to walk. That was hard. And I remember he did a huge change, just was so adamant about something. And I was angry. I had a lot of emotions going on because it's like I was angry at, you know, his situation. I was wanting to blame everybody. Jesus, I wanted to blame everybody. And I was so angry. I was like, ugh. And it was like, okay, I need to just stop at the end of the day. And so I did I finally, in April, he made a choice. He wanted to move back where we were from. And it was probably the hardest time, but he did it.
Remember that holding tight to things?
Yeah, he did it. And man, I was like, holy shit. I mean, the love for a mother and a child's love is beyond words.
Yeah, but that one step back.
Holy crap. Yeah. And I had to trust.
The confidence and empowered him to take more steps.
And he did it. And I was like, fuck. And I was like,
because you let him breathe.
She was trying to be very nice to me, but she was like, Paula. And I'm going, and she's like, I don't remember what, I wrote it down in a journal or whatever, but something you said to me, I should have just locked it in a text. But you were basically, you're going to just have to trust, Paula, and you got to just drop back. And it was like there was so much going on because we had our grandchildren came home. He went to rehab. He got out of the hospital after because a medical. And then the flood happened. And every single day I celebrate. Every single day. And he's still doing his journey in his way. And
there's a lot of pieces of that journey, and we talked a little bit, right? Like when you first get sober, you're excited and you're enthusiastic and you got this, right? But then after a few months, like that guilt, that shame, the remorse, the victim mentality, all those feelings, all those emotions, they come right to the forefront out of nowhere, right? And then all of a sudden you're having flashbacks, and you're having thoughts, and you're having memories that you suppressed for so long, and it's overwhelming and it's intimidating. And most people say F it and give up, right?
Yeah.
And it's finding that drive again, right? After you realize, I remember, I think I had 45 days. And I went to an AA I was at an AA meeting, and I couldn't even form a sentence. I was supposed to read something, and I couldn't. My mind was just so scrambled. And I got so mad, and I got so frustrated because I couldn't put a thought together, and I couldn't read this damn sentence that was on the paper. And I'm like, screw this. If this is what recovery is, I don't want any part of it. So I drove my ass right over to the liquor store because that was so I go to the liquor store, and I go in and I buy a nip, and I drive around, and I'm like, ooh, yes, this isn't bad. I can handle this, right? And I drive around town, and I go back to that liquor store, and I go in and I get 2 nips. And I go around town, and I go park somewhere, and I'm like chugging my 2 nips. I'm like, oh, yes, this isn't bad. Then I go back to the liquor store, and I'm like, well, I don't want to keep coming back, so I'm just going to grab a bottle, right? And I was like, okay, well, that's effed up, first of all. And second of all, right, like I go and I start to hit that bottle, but it's not working anymore, right? And so I go hit the bottle again, and I'm still feeling, and I've still got all this garbage, and now I can't get rid of it because the one tool that I had that I knew worked to self-medicate my crap away didn't work anymore. You know, and I got into that bottle a little bit, and I went to go take the 3rd swig off, and the bottle fell out of my hands and busted all over the garage floor. And I just remember saying, like, screw this, it doesn't work anymore anyway, right?
Right.
And that was the end of it, though.
Yeah.
That was the end of it. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen again. I'm just saying life is hard. Life is hard on a regular day, on a good day, on a sober day, on life in recovery. Is intense. Right? And you have to have a strong desire.
You gotta want it. You gotta want it.
With willpower, and I'm not saying that because willpower you're not willpowered to be stuck. It has nothing to do with that. Like, you are sick, you need to get well. That's the bottom line, right? I wasn't a bad person that needed to get good. I was a sick person that needed to get well. My heart is good. My mind is good. I am a good person. I was just stuck. So what I'm saying is,
it's work.
We're never out of the clear, right? I had a friend reach out yesterday, and she celebrated 2 years, and I'm like,
yay!
Yes. Last night she texted me and she said, I just want a drink. And I said, you know, you're responsible for. We're alcoholics. We are alcoholics. We have alcoholic thinking. You're not responsible for your thoughts or your feelings, but you are responsible for your actions. And so this morning she texted me, and she's doing better and all these things. And I said, I'm proud of you for telling on yourself. Because if you were to keep that a secret and nobody knew you were struggling, it would have been really, really easy to fall back to what you know. And she didn't. And that was the choice. That's where the choice lies. The choice doesn't lie on the day where I'm trying to not stick a needle in my arm, or I don't want to take another shot, or I don't want to walk to the liquor store, or I don't want to go meet my drug dealer. That's not when my choice is, because my choice was taken a long away a long time ago, right? I don't have a choice at this point. I am using against my own will because I can't stand the fathom of thinking how deathly sick I'm going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Choices
that's
now every day. And even my husband will say, we'll be sitting out in the hot tub, right? And he's like, wouldn't it be awesome if we could sit back and have a drink? Would it be? I don't know. I don't have the use for it or the need for it anymore. And I can promise you that if we did that, next month we would start to lose things. Next year we would be homeless, right? Like that's how this works.
Yeah.
And I'm no longer willing to give away everything I've worked hard for.
I'm so proud of you. I just think it's awesome. And it's like maybe, and you can correct me what your thought is about this. I am a firm believer, change. You have to want it, but you have to want it so bad you can taste it. And if you can't find it within, then reach out to people. Because a lot of times, this is what I hear. And this is something that I've actually started to really pay attention myself, because people do say reach out, and I understand that, but what about reaching in? Because I know a few right now that suffer, and reach in.
I completely agree. However, there's a whole lot of trust that needs to be built before that reach in is even going to be valuable, right? Because anybody can reach in, and it's not going to be receptive to somebody that doesn't give a shit about who's doing the reaching in, right? If I'm not connected to the person that I'm checking in on, if I've fallen to the wayside, or if I have some underlying issue and they don't want to hear from me, that reach in's not going to do any good.
Right.
It has to be somebody that they trust, somebody they relate to, and somebody that they want to talk to. So change. Yes, you have to change. Like I said a million times, I was surrounded by people that I literally thought were my friends. They were my clientele to deal drugs, right? Like,
Right,
they were
right.
not my friends. They were my drinking buddies. They weren't my friends. Change is hard. We tend to stay with what feels comfortable.
Change is every day. I don't care who you
And
are.
you're asking somebody who's been struggling for a very long time to change every single thing. You're not asking for one small change. We're asking for them to change their life. That means the people, the places, the things, the everything that is comfortable to them needs to be different.
Yeah.
All while you're dealing with the guilt, the shame, the remorse, the feelings, the trauma. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And
so supporting them, finding small, achievable steps throughout the day. I remember in new recovery, I would write lists. Get up, make your coffee, sweep your floor. And I would tackle one and I'd cross it off, and it would make me feel better. That empowerment, right? Oh, I can do this. And then at the end of the day, I would see like, holy crap, I actually did things today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I noticed
Right?
when you're productive and see somebody, you're nailing it right now when you're watching, and that's an exciting thing to see.
That's hard. Like as a mom, we're too close, because then we have that. We've talked about this overcompensation. I overcompensated with my kids because I felt guilty for not being there. I felt guilty for all the trauma I caused. Felt guilty for the pain. So I gave them all these things. Well, they're in the bottom of their life right now, right? And then I'm doing all the things for them that they should be doing on their own. I didn't do them any favors. I ended up with young adult women who didn't know how to do things for themselves because I never taught them. I was doing it for them.
Yeah.
Right? And so we are a generation of overcompensators.
Yeah.
We are a generation of self-medicating individuals. And if we came out the other side, we're trying to make right. Right? And now we have a new generation full of issues. And another generation coming up that we have to figure out how to help.
And I'm hoping, and this is one thing that I'm hoping, with you doing what you're doing, me trying to be a huge advocate, and others that are an advocate, breaking generation cycles.
Absolutely.
Because what I noticed is, and it could be me, but there are sometimes that I'll listen to some parents and see stuff, and I'm like, oh, for the love of God, just shut up. Because I'm like, you know what, this stuff started here. It's gone from here. It's gone from here. It's gone from here to them. Break the cycle.
And that's hard, though. You're telling them, but you're not giving them the steps to do that.
Yeah.
And it starts with forgiving yourself for the things that you've gone through, understanding what's yours to own and what's not.
Yep.
Letting go of the shame and being able to talk about it with your kids. You know, parents are a really hard selling point for me. I try to support parents. I try to talk to parents about their kids' usage or issues, but it falls on deaf ears, right?
Yeah.
Because then there needs to be some accountability and there needs to be
And
some ownership.
owning it feels so good, because I remember I sat down with my two probably 3 or 4 years ago. I said, oh, I'm going to write a book. One of them was in a situation, didn't want to hear it, but we talk about it now. But I've owned my stuff. I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry. I said I should not. I should have not stayed in the situation I was in. I apologized, blah, blah, blah. Mom, you're an incredible mom. I'm like, that doesn't matter.
Hold up, though. I want to stop you there, because you can apologize, but you did the best you could.
That's what my husband says all the time. He goes, would you stop beating yourself up? I'm like, they got brought up in dysfunction. He goes, Paula, stop.
So did you.
Exactly.
So did I.
Exactly.
So did my kids. So
Yep.
stop the blame.
Yep.
Stop the.
That's what he
we're
says
not
a
doing
lot.
Anybody any favors.
Yeah. He goes, you've got to stop. And I have said what I needed to say, and now I'm moving on. But I apologized to them and said, I'm sorry.
My son is 12, and he asked me just last week. It started because he wrote a paper about heroes. Whew. And he said, a hero is somebody who is kind, and a hero is somebody who puts other people before themselves and always wants to help. And my hero is my mom. And he said, I don't understand it, but you're kind to everybody, even the people that have hurt you. And he said, how can you do that? And I said, buddy, the people that were unkind to me were very sick.
Yeah.
And they had their own journey, and they're still suffering in their journey. And I have to trust that kindness will help. Kindness will help. Me being mad and angry at people that have hurt me isn't going to be helpful. I've done some really crappy things to people that I never intended to hurt. And I hope that there's some forgiveness there along the line. Right?
That's
I did
beautiful.
the best that I could with what I know. And now that I know better, I do better. And hopefully I can teach others to do the same.
Yeah. And then that's something that I've got to, that's the final part that I'm dealing
Cool.
with.
Now I know what to text you.
Yeah, you need to because it's like that's something that I'm working through. And I actually I don't have the book with me. Yep, I read. I'll read or but I'm like, okay, I've dealt with this part. I've done my journey with this. I actually even confronted my abuser before he died, which was so amazing because I took my power back.
Absolutely.
I said, explain what you did, blah, blah, blah. It came out. It was healing, but I needed that. And actually, Jeremiah was a baby when I did that. So that was like so empowering for me. But then I had to do the work.
You are going to have to continue to do the work. There's not a day that goes by that I don't put effort in, right? It's when those negative self-talks come in, the guilt, all the things that we did wrong, right? Like turn your thinking around and say, I did the best I could. You need to let that go. And you're going to keep repeating that over and over and over until you start to believe it.
Yeah, because my husband, he will say, Paula, stop. That's exactly what he says. He goes, you did the best you could. And I'll say, but he's like, stop. You did the best you could at the time with what you had.
Absolutely.
So, and anyways, do you have any closing comments? Because you're just an amazing person. You're spot on. I am very blessed that our paths crossed. And it's kind of funny because, you can talk to somebody and I don't know if it's because it was such a private, intense conversation the first time we chatted that it was like, holy moly. And it enlightened me. It made me really think. And I'm like, holy smokes. But you're my go-to when I see, you know, a struggling, you know, addict, because it's like, wow, because how do I want to put this? You give me, one, the reality, two, what's going on, and three, like, this is what's happening. So you put my brain into a different, like, thought process. And I thank you for that, because that's what people need. So I'm hoping someday that I can see you on a stage and really, I mean, I know you talk for schools, but I think your insight, you need to be traveling. That's all I got to say. Because I look at people sometimes when they talk and I go, have you even gone through shit? And not to be snotty or rude, but I have. I mean, I've even sat there, and it's kind of funny because I've talked to counselors and stuff, and I've had one of them say, Paula, you really need to, like, get out there and talk to people, because you are like, I'm like, no. I said, my thing is with me is I'm so blunt that I'd be like, stop your freaking crying and do the goddamn work and own your shit and live the life, because it's work. No matter what, you got to go through the work. It's every day is going to go up and down. You have good days, bad days. My thing I'm working on now, yeah, I'm going to let everybody know. It's a guilt thing. That's my thing I'm working on, because I should not have been in the situation I was, but I'm working through that. But my other stuff that I've worked really hard through, it's like, yeah, I had to work at it, and I still work at it, but I had to learn to forgive. Everybody has their thing that they do, their higher power, whatever. I have my own way of thinking. And so as I close this, I just want to say thank you so much. If you do need to reach her, fast text her. She'll have her information on you. She's awesome, and I appreciate you so much. So, you know, a lot of people will ask me, how can you help? How can I help? How can we help? I emphasize this a lot. We live in a different time. So please step up and be the reason somebody smiles today. And thank you. Thank you for joining me. And if you want to have a closing thing, or you're good, but thank you.
I'm good.
So I appreciate you for joining me today. Until next time, we will talk to you later. Bye.